Afternoon, everybody. Welcome to another Rental Housing Association Southern Alameda County webinar. My name is Robert Robledo. I'm the executive director here at the association. I so look forward to meeting you all one day in person. Starting in November and not being able to meet any members is not fun, but that is going to happen soon. I have spoke to our president, and we are targeting, fingers crossed, that everything goes well with the virus. We're targeting July to try to do a hybrid event where it'll be in person and webinar. So keep your fingers crossed. Obviously, we'll have some rules around that, but that'll be coming later on. I'm also excited to introduce our Director of Membership, Sandy Moore, who's also on the call. But it's not about us today. Today, we are excited to have Adaptive Dwellings here, and they're going to talk to everything and all the ins and outs of ADUs and what's allowed and what you can do, what you shouldn't do. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Chris and Phil and let you guys take it away.
All right. Well, thank you, Robert, and nice to be on this webinar today with everybody. We're really excited for this opportunity to speak with rental housing providers about ADUs, accessory dwelling units. Our companies, we have two logos you'll see on this slide. Adaptive Dwellings is a company we launched last year in 2020 to focus solely on accessory dwelling units. We do feasibility studies and architectural services, help you get your plans approved by your local jurisdiction. And we'll be talking a lot about that today. And this was birthed out of our consulting company, Edrington and Associates. Some of you may know Steve Edrington. He was the former executive director for the East Bay Rental Housing Association. So depending on where you own or potentially own other properties, he has a lot of experience in East Bay real estate going back to the 1990s, and has been a big proponent of helping landlords provide safe and decent and affordable housing to our community. And we think ADUs are a great way to do that. And when Steve kicked off Edrington and Associates, one of the top inquiries he would get would be about, I have this illegal unit, and I want to make sure that I get it properly permitted, or I have this garage and I want to figure out how to legally convert it into a unit. And just around that same time, the state laws started coming out to help make it easier for property owners to add accessory dwelling units to their properties. And so these things have really come nicely together. We see a lot of new businesses popping up like Adaptive Dwellings in the accessory dwelling unit space. And we're going to talk today about what makes us different and why we might be the right fit for you. So before we kick it off, I also want to introduce Phil Barthman, who is on our team. He is our senior building inspector. Phil, you want to give a little introduction?
Sure. Hi, my name is Phil Barthman, and I've been working for Edrington and Associates and Adapt Dwellings for a little over a year now. And we have been really actively pursuing a lot of accessory dwelling units. And one of the things that we've discovered is the uniqueness. Every single one of these has a unique character, is much like people. And it's very helpful to have the expertise that we've developed in our company to help people develop these ADUs into rentable units, which is the goal. Before I worked here, I was a building inspector for Alameda County for 20 years. And prior to that, I was an IBEW electrician for 17 years. I've also been teaching at the college level, currently at the Laney College in Oakland, teaching electrical code and other electrician-related subjects.
Phil is definitely the right person for this job. We really, really grateful to have him on our team and leverage all his knowledge. And Phil, you maybe have even inspected some of these people's properties before.
It is entirely possible. That's kind of surprising how the worm turns on some of these projects.
That's right. All right, so let's get going here. So what is in it for you today? We're going to increase your knowledge about accessory dwelling units. Understand the new laws. In 2020, there was a new set of state laws passed, making it easier, and we're going to talk about what you can now do under those state laws. In most cases, the state laws are what are kind of defining the maximums that you can do, because most local jurisdictions are not being any more generous than the state law requires them to be. So that's kind of what we're basing today's presentation off of. But it is always possible that there might be some particular, differences in your local ADU ordinance, depending on where, what jurisdiction you are, you own property in. We're going to talk about the potential for ADUs to add value to your property, both in terms of generating rental income and resale value. You have an additional rentable unit on your property. That makes your property more attractive to sell to, especially to someone who would be like a real estate investor wanting to have rental property with additional units. We're going to talk about the paths to legalization for illegal or unpermitted units. It's very, very common here in the Bay Area to have units that were created without full permits and do not have a proper certificate of occupancy. And it's not a good idea to be renting those out, even though many people do. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that. And then lastly, understand the risk and rewards of building an accessory dwelling unit. And I noticed that we just were joined also by our architect, Gracie O'Rourke. Nice to have you on.
Hi, sorry I missed the intro. I didn't think I could make it until 1, but I was able to sneak in early. So
excellent. Well, we're really glad to have you here. And just for everyone else to know, Gracie joined our team, what was it, last December? And she's brought a lot of her expertise in architecture and design to our clients to help them design their units, get their plans completed. The cities and counties are requiring a very detailed set of plans to be submitted with applications for accessory dwelling units. And while, in theory, as a homeowner, you might be able to do this on your own, most people can't. They hit too many barriers. And that's really where we come in. We're experts at working with local jurisdictions, and we have a licensed architect in Gracie who's very, very talented and good at getting plans submitted and approved through the cities. So it's great to have both Gracie and Phil on our team. And throughout the webinar today, you'll get a chance to get to know them a little bit more and hear about some of the projects that we're working on.
Thanks, Chris.
All right, so disclaimer, we have to get this out of the way. We're not lawyers, okay? So this is not legal advice. The reason why we're saying this is that oftentimes, especially when it comes to a unpermitted or illegal unit, you might have a tenant in there. You need to consult legal counsel before you do anything regarding that tenancy. It's a very sensitive part of the law, especially in a very tight housing market like we are in right now in the Bay Area. So our comments today are general in nature. Definitely talk to an attorney if you need to. So let's get into this. What is an ADU? This is sort of a legal term that came up over the last 10, 15 years, an accessory dwelling unit, but it's more commonly known as an in-law unit or a granny flat. I think those are probably the most kind of colloquial terms I hear thrown around for ADUs. But essentially, this is a secondary house or apartment with its own kitchen and bath, sleeping area, and separate entrance. And as the name might suggest, it is accessory to a primary dwelling. So it part of the definition is that it's not a duplex. Just by adding an ADU to your house, you don't create a duplex. You have a single family home with an accessory dwelling unit. And that accessory dwelling unit can be created in a variety of ways, and we'll talk about those today. But it's really important that it has its own kitchen and bath, its sleeping area, and a separate entrance. Those are some of the kind of very fundamental things that define what an ADU is. You probably know that if you're on this webinar, but just thought I would get that out of the way. So more about ADUs. This is something that makes it different than adding a standard unit, is that it may use the water and energy connections of the primary dwelling. That might not be the best choice for you in all situations, but it does present some opportunities, for some savings in getting the cost of creating an ADU for some property owners. Of course, ADUs may be rented separately. However, they cannot be converted to condominiums, and they cannot be rented out on Airbnb, VRBO, any sort of short-term rental, even just a Craigslist posting saying, hey, this is available for 20 days. You can't do that. Most local jurisdictions are really cracking down about short-term rentals, and in the ADU laws, they're specifically prohibited. So why are we talking about ADUs, and why are you seeing so much right now about ADUs out in the marketplace? Well, the reason is that we have a massive housing shortage, especially in the Bay Area, but really through all of California. And local jurisdictions were not doing enough on their own to help address this. And so state lawmakers stepped in and said, we're going to mandate that local jurisdictions start to make it easier to build these accessory dwelling units. And, you know, it's really sort of the low-hanging fruit of our housing shortage, because we're not talking about, you know, allowing, you know, fourplexes on single-family lots or any of those kind of crazier ideas just yet. This is saying, hey, you have a garage, you could convert it to a unit and rent it out to someone in need of an apartment, and that helps that family, that person have a place to live. And so it's an attractive solution compared to some of these other proposals that feel a little bit more radical. So the state lawmakers said, let's introduce ADUs. That, you know, in 2020 is the year they really made it easier, and give property owners this income potential. You know, something we're seeing a lot of with clients and potential clients that we talk to. Someone's getting older and they want some extra income while, you know, in retirement, and here's an opportunity. They have space in their house. Maybe they're not using all of the space in their house. They can convert it to a rental unit, make some income. Or maybe you have a family member that you want to come live on your property, but not live in your house. ADUs are a great opportunity for that as well. The nice thing about them, and I mentioned this earlier, is they maintain the look and feel of the neighborhood. For the most part, the requirements of where you can put an ADU have it be that you're not massively altering the street front or anything like that. So they're a more palatable solution. And there's many barriers that have recently been removed when it comes to what you're allowed to do. So that's why we're talking about this today. So what are the options for putting an ADU on your property? We're going to break this into two slides. This first slide, we're talking about single family lots. This is what you can do under state law. And again, it might vary slightly by local jurisdiction, but for the most part right now in the Bay Area, this is what people are following. So the first option, you can build a new attached structure. These are often referred to as attached ADUs. It's essentially an attached addition to your primary house. And that addition has its own separate entrance, all the things we talked about before. And you have the ability to separately rent this out. The other option is to build a new detached structure. This is very similar to option number one, except that it's not connected to the primary house. Lastly, you can convert existing space that can either be space that's already part of the building envelope, whether that be a basement or a garage, or you can convert existing detached space. If you have a detached garage, for example, on your property, or another permitted structure like a shed or a workshop or something like that, that could potentially be converted into an ADU. Now, regarding options number 1 and 2, there are some maximums in terms of the square footage, right? So the state law is saying, hey, local jurisdictions, you have to allow ADUs, but they are allowing the local jurisdictions to put some size limits on ADUs. So for attached or detached structures, local jurisdictions may limit the size to 850 square feet for a 1-bedroom ADU or 1,000 square feet for 2 bedrooms or more. For an attached structure, there's also a little bit more of a size restriction, which is they don't want the ADU to exceed more than 50% of the floor area of the primary dwelling. So that's something they put in place so that you don't have this addition that's much, that's kind of competing in size with the primary dwelling. However, the state law will allow, no matter what, even with that 50%, they'll allow you to have at least an 800 square foot ADU. So this is a really nice provision in the state law, allowing you to at least do that. You're going to see throughout this presentation, the general setback requirements for the side and rear are 4 feet. So side and rear property lines, 4 feet from the accessory dwelling unit. That is slightly more helpful because in many cases previously it was 5 feet or more. So you're getting a little bit more space here with the new state law. Also, height limits of 16 feet. And this is something that we really would love to see become a little bit more generous. 16 feet basically doesn't quite allow you to do a 2-story ADU. And we think that there's a lot of potential. We talk to a lot of people that have the kind of space to do a 2-story ADU. And we think that could be very helpful for creating more rentable units. But currently that's what it's at, is 16 feet. In terms of number 2, build new detached structures. This one, again, the local jurisdictions in the Bay Area for the most part are doing the same thing, 850 square feet for a 1-bedroom, 1,000 square feet max for a 2-bedroom. However, let's say your local jurisdiction does not have a maximum square footage and they haven't defined what it is. You can go up to the state maximum of 1,200 square feet. So that's a very nice sized unit. Another kind of interesting fact is that local ordinance can actually allow over 1,200 square feet if they want to. Nothing's keeping them to that. So if you had a very pro ADU local jurisdiction, I don't know too many of those, but hypothetically they could allow an ADU greater than 1,200 square feet. Again, 4-foot setbacks and 16-foot height limit. Now let's go to number 3. And I'm going to bring Phil and Gracie in here to talk about this too, because this is the most common, definitely for our company. As you might guess from our name, Adapt Dwellings, we're really into adapting space into ADUs, converting existing space. It's also because this is kind of where most of the types of properties in densely populated areas like the Bay Area, this is one of the easiest, most feasible ways to create an ADU is, again, to convert that basement, that attic, that garage, that accessory structure already that you already have, to convert it into an ADU. And when you're doing that, there's actually no maximum square footage according to state law if you're taking an existing structure and converting an ADU. There's some gray area there with how local jurisdictions are interpreting that, and we are seeing many local jurisdictions still trying to enforce the 850, 1,000 square foot maximums for conversion spaces. But if you read the state law and you read the HCD guidelines, it's actually pretty clear that they're saying no maximum square footage for conversions. Also with these conversions, you're eligible to expand the footprint up to 150 square feet for the purposes of ingress or egress. And this is also where we're with conversion ADUs, where this concept for a single family home comes into play of something called a junior accessory dwelling unit. And Phil, can you just talk about that for a minute? And what is a junior accessory dwelling unit?
Sure. And a junior accessory dwelling unit is where you are taking a portion of your house, let's say, for example, a bedroom, and you take that bedroom and you can add a kitchen to it. Now, the downside is you don't have a bathroom necessarily in that, although you are allowed to add one. The nice option that you can have with a JADU is you can actually use a bathroom that's existing in the house, and it can be shared between the ADU, the junior ADU, and the primary residence. So that allows a lot more options allows people to find a niche in their home where they can have a separate rentable unit. And with that, it's not going to require a great deal of conversion and construction to create that sort of a space.
All right. And this is a question that we get a lot, but just because someone wants to build a small ADU, that doesn't automatically mean that that's a junior ADU, correct?
No, that's true. Yeah, no, a junior ADU is only going to be created on the inside of your home. These other detached structures, or where you're building the primary space of the unit, wouldn't qualify as a JADU. The 150 square foot extension is one of the rules that you have to deal with when you're dealing with an ADU. It does have to have a private entrance. And so the 150 square feet makes it easier to create that entrance for your tenant.
Okay, thank you. That's good. That's great clarification. So, a lot of people ask, well, why a JADU? Why would I build a JADU instead of a regular ADU? And I think there's really two main things to consider here. One is that the state law allows you, and I think this is our next bullet point, to have both a junior ADU and a regular ADU on a single family lot. So for a very ambitious, enterprising property owner who wanted to create 2 rental units on their property as ADUs, it is possible to do that, but one of them has to be technically a junior ADU. So again, that would have to be space you convert from the envelope of the existing house that's less than 500 square feet into a junior ADU. And then in addition to that, you could have another standard ADU, which in most cases would probably be a detached new structure. But again, there's some room for interpretation there with the local jurisdictions in terms of what that could look like. However, you cannot take a single family home that you don't live in and add an ADU and a junior ADU and rent out all 3 units. They don't want you doing that. So there is an owner occupancy requirement. If you have a junior accessory dwelling unit, you either have to live in the junior accessory dwelling unit or you have to live in the primary dwelling as the owner. So that's one technicality with this, I think, is intended to keep people from running amok with triplexing every property they could buy up, especially investors. So that's one thing to know about junior ADUs. The other potential reason why I think people consider this option is that they are looking for something like a family member to live there, someone where they don't have a lot of space in their house to maybe create a full unit, a full ADU with its own bathroom and kitchen and sleeping area, but they have enough space to have a smaller unit, and they don't mind sharing the bathroom with the ADU because it's someone they know. That's the other kind of situation where we hear people considering junior accessory dwelling units.
I think it's also important to point out that you don't necessarily have to share a bathroom with the junior ADU. If you do want to build the junior ADU with its own bathroom, you can. That's a possibility.
Right. And Gracie, I was going to just bring you into this. 500 square feet, you can still do some pretty good designs to have a lot in a 500 square feet space. Do you want to talk a little bit about some of that?
Yeah, 500 square feet is plenty of room to have a 1 bedroom and like an open living kitchen concept. So you might not be able to have your own like dining room and like a huge living space, but it's definitely enough room to have a private bedroom with an open kitchen, living room, and a bathroom. So I think it's called a junior ADU, but it's definitely more than a studio if you want it to be.
Yeah, and one of the things that we do, and Gracie does primarily with our clients when we get to this certain stage, is looking at, okay, if you're converting a space, how much space do you have, and how do we help you design a unit that will kind of meet the balance of all your needs in terms of the rent you can collect, how attractive it will be to tenants, how much space you're taking away from the existing building, especially if it's something like parking spaces that you're building an ADU in. So, and we'll talk more about this on the next slide too, but Gracie's really good at helping our clients conceptualize these things and making their design decisions so that we can, really get the projects moving forward and keeping our clients happy with the ADU they're designing. Yeah. All right, so let's talk about multifamily ADUs next. So there's 2 options for creating an ADU on a multifamily lot. This is big news because prior to 2020, this was not allowed. Some local jurisdictions like San Francisco maybe allowed it, but most of the state, you were not seeing this option. And this was an option that came about from these new state laws. And they're saying in a multifamily environment, you can create ADUs either by converting non-habitable space or building up to 2 new detached ADUs. What's the distinction here? Non-habitable space. This is different than in the single family home environment, where you actually could convert a portion of the primary dwelling into its own separate unit. In a multifamily building, they don't want you taking anything that's habitable or livable space and splitting that into multiple units, right? So what we're talking about here are things like carports, garages, potentially, storage areas, things like that. And there's a lot of these types of properties throughout the Bay Area. And this presents a really interesting opportunity to take some of those. And Gracie, we're actually working on a couple of these kind of projects right now.
Yeah, we have one in Oakland that is similar to this, where they have carports and a bunch of parking on the ground floor. And then there's 2 stories above it. And the owners of the building have to do a seismic retrofit because it's a soft story building. So as part of that seismic retrofit, they said, well, if we're going to do this work, we should look into adding ADUs, because putting in more walls on that ground floor is going to help the structure of the building. So they're kind of killing 2 birds with 1 stone.
Exactly. So let's talk a little bit about more of these options. The same maximums that apply as we talked about on the single family environment, 850 square feet or 1,000 square feet. This second point is very interesting. So local jurisdictions can actually limit a single property to only one of these options. They can say, hey, you can either convert non-habitable space or you can build up to 2 new detached ADUs. However, we're seeing most local jurisdictions allow both of these concurrently, which is very cool. So you could, and by the way, they're defining multifamily as anything with 2 or more units. So you could actually have a duplex, and you could build up to 2 new detached ADUs and potentially convert a garage. I mean, there's potential to add a lot of units here, depending on your local jurisdiction. It's going to be complicated. And I think we're seeing that more and more with these types of multifamily projects, is that there's a lot of other requirements that come into play. And Phil's an expert on those, and we'll be talking about those a little bit later on. But that is technically what's possible, which is really presenting a lot of opportunities here for property owners. So what can you do? So under option number 1, convert non-habitable space, all 2+ unit properties are allowed at least 1 conversion ADU. And if you have a larger property, you can have 1 conversion ADU for every 4 existing units, right? So if you had a 16 unit property, you could have 4 conversion ADUs. You could take, let's say you had, 10 garage spots. You could take a few of those bays and create up to 4 ADUs, right? That's a really cool opportunity. And this also presents an opportunity to legalize unpermitted units. This is, part of what's going on right now. Is there's a lot of older buildings that maybe someone had like a manager's unit or something that was never quite permitted for occupancy. And under the new state law, there is a pathway to legalize such units. In terms of option number 2 on the detached ADU side, again, all 2+ unit properties are allowed up to 2 new detached ADUs. Same thing in terms of maximum square footage. Most jurisdictions are going to put the number on the green arrow above, but if there's no local max, the state maximum is 1,200 square feet. Same setbacks apply to a multifamily environment for a detached ADU, as we talked about earlier, and same height limit. So a couple other things that were passed in these new 2020 state laws that I think are really important for people to be aware of. So first of all, replacement parking is not required when parking is demolished for an ADU. This was done, again, to make it easier on property owners to say, hey, I want to build that ADU in that carport. Yeah, technically it's taking a spot away. That might make my building slightly less attractive to someone to whom parking is really important. But at the same time, this is particular when the property is within a certain distance from a bus stop, a public transit stop. And so in many cases, we're seeing people willing to make that trade-off. It's a shift towards a little bit more of a urbanization, where we're saying, hey, I don't necessarily need to have a place to park my car. I don't necessarily need to own a car if, if I'm set up to, get to a BART station to go to work, things like that. So replacement parking is not required under the new state law. Okay, owner occupancy. We talked a little bit about owner occupancy requirements, particularly for a JADU, a junior ADU. But for a standard ADU, the state law is saying that no local jurisdiction can require owner occupancy until the year 2025. This was put in there because previously some local jurisdictions were requiring that if you built an ADU, you had to occupy either the ADU or the primary dwelling. And I think this was saying, hey, the spirit of this law is we want rental property owners, people who do not own or occupy, to be able to benefit from this ADU law and add additional units to our housing stock. So this is sort of a compromise by saying local jurisdictions can't do it until 2025. And this is one of the primary reasons we recommend people start really taking this seriously and looking at the feasibility of doing an ADU, because the clock is kind of ticking on this owner occupancy requirement. It's likely most local jurisdictions are going to start requiring it, honestly, unless they're more ADU friendly. So that's something to look out for. Impact fees. This is a big one. Impact fees cannot be charged for an ADU under 750 square feet. And if your ADU is over 750 square feet, they can only be charged on the amount of square footage over 750. So Phil, can you talk a little bit about impact fees? What are they? How do they work?
So impact fees are fees that jurisdictions apply to new construction, and it helps pay for the infrastructure that's already been built. It pays for schools, it pays for a lot of different stuff. And well, as an example, we did a feasibility study for a unit up in Napa, and to build a 749 square foot ADU in Napa, all of the charges, permit charges, everything else, all of the fees added up to under $4,000. Now, that was fine for 749 square feet. As soon as you hit 750 square feet, that $4,000 charge turned into $35,000 worth of charges. So a substantial increase. And depending on the jurisdiction, again, jurisdictions have the opportunity to treat this individually. They have different takes. Some jurisdictions are, really very pro ADU, but others are going to say, yeah, we're going to allow ADUs, but we want to minimize the size of these unless we get our money.
Yeah, and again, 750 square feet. If 500 square feet, you could make a pretty decent unit. Gracie, 750 square feet, you can do a nice living space.
Yeah, I think we fit 2 bedrooms one time in a 750 square foot space. So
in fact, I don't know if you know off the top of your head, but how many of our projects do you think are over 750 square feet? There's not, it's not that many.
We have one. Yeah. Most are under, like right at 750 or below. Yeah.
Right. So, this is the thing that I think kind of works itself out nicely for many reasons. People, I think on all, on the local jurisdiction level kind of prefer smaller ADUs. Property owners pay less in impact fees. You still get a nice sized unit, and it maintains that accessory to the primary structure feeling a little bit more. So again, really an important consideration to make when considering your design. And then in some cases, you're going to be limited by existing parameters, especially if you're converting existing space. But, if you're building something new, it's definitely an important thing to consider. So a couple other items on here, zoning corrections. So this is a little bit vague wording, but basically the state law says that correction of non-conforming zoning conditions on existing structures cannot be required for permit approval. Phil, can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So many times you might have a situation where, well, for example, I live in a house that was built in 1940, and I have a garage that has a 0 lot line. So it's built right on the property line with no setbacks. the jurisdiction is not allowed to come back and say, okay, well, you can build an ADU in that garage, but we need you to meet the minimum 4-foot setback and change your whole property, which again, because I'm grandfathered in, that would not be a requirement.
Yeah, and that's really big for garage conversions. We talk to a lot of people that have those kind of situations, and it's a nice provision they put in here because otherwise you really wouldn't be able to do those garage conversions.
Yeah, many times.
All right, and then lastly, owner, this is also language in the state law that a property owner can request to delay a notice of violation for 5 years when the correction is not necessary to protect health and safety. I'm not entirely sure what the intent of this was. It doesn't feel like it's strong enough to really do much, but it is providing a possibility that if there's a non-health safety issue notice of violation, that you might be able to request that that delay as it pertains to an ADU, but we're not really seeing that being done in practice.
It's far too easy for a jurisdiction to determine that something is a hazard or a life safety hazard. And most of the code items that we find jurisdictions that are enforcing are all lumped into the life safety hazard. So yes, we're still waiting to see how this one's going to play out.
Right. Okay. Also, there were a couple new laws that were passed in 2020 and in 2021 regarding homeowners associations and common interest developments. So Assembly Bill 670 in 2020 basically said that homeowners associations cannot prohibit or unreasonably restrict ADUs or JADUs on single family lots or planned unit developments. So this language is a little bit soft because it doesn't really define what unreasonable means. But what it does say here is that, if you live in a homeowners association and you want to build an ADU and you meet the requirements for an ADU, they can't say no. They can't prohibit you from doing it, and they can't put you through so many requirements that it unreasonably restricts your ability to do an ADU. They have to basically, if it meets the state law, you should be able to do it. And so that's a nice provision for people that were previously running up against that particular roadblock. And then a newer bill, Assembly Bill 3182, is also a related one. This loosens the rental restriction requirements in common interest developments. So it basically says that a common interest development must allow at least 25% of units to be rented out. They can't put limits that are less than 25%. And what's interesting about that is that ADUs and JADUs don't count towards that 25%. So if you had a bunch of single family homes in a common interest development, and some of those single family homes added ADUs, that wouldn't change that 25% rental. They still have to allow 25% of the homes to be rented. And then also even the primary residence doesn't count toward the 25% if that primary residence has an accessory dwelling unit or junior accessory dwelling unit on the lot and is owner occupied. So a couple of nice provisions in here, again, to make it easier to add ADUs in planned unit developments, common interest developments. So this is really where our expertise really starts to come into play. Everything we've talked about so far has been essentially about zoning. They've been zoning overlays saying, hey, local jurisdictions, you have to start allowing these things regardless of what your local zoning says otherwise. You have to start allowing ADUs. But especially when we come to the world of conversion ADUs, which again is really our specialty, converting existing spaces, building codes absolutely 100% still apply. And just because the state law says you're now able to create an ADU out of your garage doesn't mean that it's a sure thing that you can create an ADU out of your garage. And the reason for that is that many properties are very old, are in very different different conditions, and building codes are a whole world of knowledge and complication. Phil, we hear people all the time say, but I built this to code. So it's going to be a breeze. It's going to go right through planning. Can you talk about that?
Yes, it's kind of funny, people talking about, oh, it's built to code, it's built to code. Determining what is built to code is the local jurisdiction, the building inspector's purview. To get to a point where you're comfortable saying that takes years of experience and years of education to actually understand what the codes are. And we have worked with very experienced building contractors who rely on the building inspector to make sure that things do in fact meet code. Codes change every 3 years. They tend to get stricter every 3 years. There is new technology that's added. There's a lot of different things that are coming into play. Plus, you also have political considerations that apply to the code as well. As an example, one of the things that the code has recently changed to create is we've had a problem with mold in homes. And so one of the things that we're creating now and required to create is a lot more ventilation in a home, basement ventilation, attic ventilation, power ventilation on the inside of the home to allow the toxic fumes that come from paint and new carpet and those sorts of things. All those VOCs need to get extracted from the unit. And so there's a lot of different areas where the codes are applying now that they weren't even a consideration 5 or 10 years ago. So these are things that as building inspectors, we have to keep up with. And as the jurisdictions they're going to require all of these various different code changes to your new unit. And it doesn't matter if your unit was built 20 years ago. Now, there are certain rules that are allowed to, that you're allowed to kind of go soft on if you can prove that the building was built for a long time ago. And sometimes you're actually allowed to apply the code that was in force at the time that it was built. But this is not a certainty. And so you can expect to see a lot of issues if you're not a current builder who's really savvy to current modern codes.
Right. And this is really where we come in. I think we get contacted at this stage by most of our clients who basically they've done their research, they've learned about ADUs and generally have an idea of what they can do. But they're kind of stuck because they're getting conflicting information. They might talk to a contractor and hear one thing. They might talk to an architect and hear another thing. They might try to go to the city and talk to a planner and hear a third thing. And they're saying, I'm stuck. I really don't understand what I can do. And this is where Phil's expertise in particular really comes in to help our clients. We do a feasibility study. We do an on-site inspection, which is not something that a lot of ADU companies always offer. Again, because each unit is different, and we really want to come see and help you understand whether it's feasible for you to even go further with your plans for an ADU based on what you've got and what your options are. So that's really a specialty of ours. The fourth bullet point on here: safety risks, fire danger, et cetera, may limit number of ADUs allowed. This is also something that we're seeing, and I think it's an important thing to point out that one of the limits, I think, to this state law is that there's going to always be some concerns that are greater than just getting a bunch of housing built. And I think fire is one of those particular examples we're seeing in communities such as Oakland and Berkeley, in the hills where there's fire overlay zones. That those cities are already putting limits on what you can do for ADUs in such areas. And it makes sense, it definitely makes sense why. But this is just to say that not everywhere you're going to be allowed to do what we talked about on the previous slides. There are always some additional considerations. And again, this is part of the feasibility study that we do for you. Is Phil does a very thorough check of all the zoning overlays, of all of the local ordinances, to help understand what is actually possible on your particular property. So let's talk about some building code considerations. This is not an exhaustive list by any means, but just to give you an idea of some of the things that we look for when we're doing a feasibility study. Ceiling height, okay? We need to make sure that the ceiling height is adequate. And Phil, can you talk about what that adequate ceiling height would look like?
Sure. So in most cases, a 7'6" is considered just about everywhere. If you have a 7'6" minimum ceiling height, that's fine. Now, if you look at the ceiling in this photo, you can see how they've got some beams there. Now, sometimes in certain situations, those beams are allowed to intrude into that 7'6". So that's not necessarily something that's going to preclude you from being able to build an ADU. In some areas, you can actually get away with a 7-foot ceiling. San Francisco is not one of those areas, but Oakland is. So, local jurisdiction rules really apply to that. Other things that are happening in this particular unit, this is a basement unit that our founder, Steve Edrington, built. Because it's a basement unit, other things that we have to consider is moisture into the unit. This particular unit, they had to go back to behind the retaining walls on the sides and waterproof those retaining walls. In addition, waterproofing was required on the floor because we cannot have moisture intrusion coming into a unit. So that's another big issue when you're dealing with ground floor and subfloor units. Another thing that because this is a basement unit, and there is a living space, a separate living space above. One of the things that we require is there's a certain minimum fire protection requirement in between the two units. In this particular case, we were actually able to use an intumescent paint that provided the fire barrier in that unit. So there's a lot of different things that we need to consider every time that we look at a space, and these are just a couple of them.
Right, and just to give a few more examples here, we have proper ingress and egress. This can also be tricky depending on the space that you're converting. Windows, utilities, heating. Phil, can you talk a little bit about some of the heating solutions that we're seeing out there?
Sure. A lot of people think, okay, well, I'll just put some resistance electric heating in. And actually, that's a real problem in the state of California. You have to really do a lot to justify electrical resistance heating, because electrical resistance heating is by nature very wasteful. We also have a lot of jurisdictions who are trying to limit new gas appliances. However, in most homes that are existing, this is not a consideration, and gas heating is going to provide you the most efficient heating for your dollar spent. If you get into areas where they want all electric, or if you're just concerned and you would prefer to go with all electric heating, there are a new technology that's really coming in hard lately, and it's called the mini split system. And it's a heat pump. And it uses air conditioning technology to not only air condition a space, but also heat a space. And the way that they're doing it electrically, it's not resistance heat. It's long story. Anyway, it's very efficient for heating for electrical. So these are really good systems. And again, because they provide cooling as well as heating, they really give you a lot of variety and a lot of quality into your units.
Absolutely. And here's just some other examples. Soundproofing, especially if you're going to be below an existing unit or to the side of it, having proper deadbolt on the front door. There's many more items, but the point of this is to say this is just an example of how there's so many considerations that I don't think people always realize when they say, oh, I'm going to do an ADU. You really do need to work with somebody who is an expert in these, who understands these things up front. Otherwise, what's going to happen is you're going to submit your application to your local jurisdiction. If you're lucky, you'll get it approved, right? And then you pull permits, you start work, and then you run into one item after another that you didn't account for, and the cost keeps increasing and increasing and increasing. So what we're trying to do here with our feasibility study, which is how we get all of our customers started, is to come help you understand, make a go or no go decision, right? Do I really want to go through with this, having the information that I have right now about what this is going to take? And we help you see it from both perspectives, both the financial potential for you to have this additional unit, the value it will add to your property, and also how much it's going to potentially cost approximately to help you get it built, and all of these different considerations to have into play. So we hope with this presentation today that you're starting to get a feel for that, and that this is helping you understand more about what's involved. And we obviously would love to help you, further. If you're considering an ADU on your property, definitely reach out to us, and we'll have contact information at the end. But let's talk a little bit next about illegal space. So I've seen this question pop up in our chat today. I think first of all, let's answer this question. What is an illegal space? Phil, can you address that?
Sure. An illegal space is also considered an unpermitted space. So when you build a home, the last thing that the building department does for you is they provide you with a certificate of occupancy. And that certificate of occupancy basically is a description of what your space is. So if you've got a single family home, it's going to describe it as a single family home with 3 bedrooms and, whatever the place looks like. Let's say that you are wanting to convert the garage or a portion of unfinished space in your home into a unit. That would be an illegal or an unpermitted space.
Okay, great. And we actually have a question that's popped up here in the chat, so I will just read it and see what you think. I have a garage in Oakland that was illegally converted to an ADU well before my ownership. It has no setback. Can I get it legalized?
If you have a permitted building or structure on your property, then yes, most likely you can have it legally converted into an ADU.
Right, and that's an important distinction. Is if the garage itself was not permitted as a garage, you're going to run into much more challenges trying to convert that space.
Yes.
Right. Okay, so let's talk about how do you legalize? So this is an interesting question. Essentially, there are a few local jurisdictions in the Bay Area that are saying, that are announcing we have what they're calling an amnesty program, right? And they're saying you can come to us and say, hey, I have an illegal unit and I want to get it legalized, and we're going to help you do that easily. We're not going to penalize you or do anything like that. And we're seeing that out of a few jurisdictions, such as San Jose, San Mateo. There's a few in San Mateo County. Currently in Alameda County, I'm not aware of any formal amnesty programs. However, people are effectively doing this already through the ADU law. And the way it works, and I'll have Phil and Gracie chime in on this a little bit, is essentially you are drawing up plans for your proposed unit, which may look very similar to what you already have, and you're getting those approved, and you're having someone from the local jurisdiction take a look at what you have. Okay, does this meet all our requirements? Does this meet the building code? At some point after you've pulled permits, there may be a local inspector who comes to take a look, and of course your unit's already completed, right? Because it's already existing. And so Phil, maybe you can talk a little bit about how that process works and how people manage this situation with an existing space that they're trying to legalize through this process.
Sure. So it really depends unit to unit, builder to builder, what the building department is going to come in and say. I've been in units that looked perfect. I mean, I walked in, I couldn't find a single code item, and I would have had no problem signing off. I've come into others where there were lots and lots of problems, and their habitability problems, safety issues, electrical safety issues, plumbing safety issues, all these different things that the building department is going to insist that they be corrected. Depending on the fit and finish, depending on the code issues, going into a unpermitted finished space may require the building department to say, hey, look, we don't like what we're seeing, and you're going to need to pull walls off and make corrections. So we don't recommend that you go in and finish a space and then have the building department come in and look at it. If you're thinking about building one, it's a much better process for everyone involved to go through the planning process, get proper plans drawn, and then get contractors who are knowledgeable in the area to do the work, so that you're not going to be chasing a lot of problems down the road.
Right, and in a lot of cases with illegal units, they might have many things that need to be fixed anyway. If you have to redo electrical outlets, redo lighting, plumbing, you're likely opening up walls, and you might be better served to just do all of those things properly right now, as if you were really building this unit new again, essentially, right, Phil?
Correct.
So this also brings up an interesting point, which is if you're going to do work like that and your illegal unit is occupied by a tenant, what do you do? And this is where our disclaimer from earlier comes in. We're not landlord tenant attorneys. We know many great landlord tenant attorneys. We'd love to refer you to them. But you really, really need to consult legal counsel if you're in a situation like this. This is a very sensitive part of the law, and not to scare everyone too badly, but we have seen situations multiple times where someone who's been renting an illegal unit for years and maybe has a great relationship with the landlord suddenly decides that they don't want to pay rent anymore. And there's no recourse that you as a landlord have to collect rent on an unpermitted unit. And in fact, you may owe all the rent that's ever been paid to you back to your tenant if they were to sue you over that. So it's very important to get these issues handled, and we definitely recommend going through the proper legal channels to get that. A little bit about certificates of occupancy. This is coming from the building code and the California Residential Code. This spells out exactly what we're talking about. No building or structure shall be used or occupied, and no change in the existing occupancy classification of a building or structure or portion thereof shall be made until the building official has issued a certificate of occupancy. So that's really what it comes down to, is if you have a separate unit, it needs its own certificate of occupancy. And Phil, this is a bit of a technicality, but a true certificate is not always issued in all cases. In some cases, a final building record is sufficient. Is that correct?
Many times the building official is just going to the building. Well, we say the building official, we're really talking about the building inspector who's doing the job. And a signature on the final of the building permit is typically what is considered the certificate of occupancy. At Alameda County, we had an extra little space that said certificate of occupancy so we could sign and date. So all the T's were crossed and I's were dotted, and everybody was happy that they had their certificate of occupancy. But yes, most jurisdictions, the signed permit is the certificate of occupancy when we're talking about residential buildings.
Mm-hmm. And this is something we provide in our feasibility studies, because like the person who asked this question about Oakland, we don't always know the record, the whole history of a building we own, especially older properties. So when someone's considering an ADU, we want to pull all the permit history that we can find. We want to look at all the building records that we can find. Phil does a really good job at that, at looking through what we have and helping our customers understand, okay, it actually looks like you do not have the proper certificate of occupancy. That's going to make this project much more difficult. Or, okay, everything looks clean here. It's going to make this project easier. So that's part of what we're trying to do with our feasibility study as well. This is the part of the presentation where we start to get into a little bit more of the fear factors here. But again, another thing to consider with an ADU are rent and eviction controls. So first, if you have a single family home that you rent out, it is exempt from rent control under a state law called the Costa-Hawkins Rental Housing Act. And most people who own such properties are well aware of this. And it's as a landlord who's free to set your own rents, it's a nice exemption to have, right? That you don't have to abide by any either state or local rent control requirements. However, the wording of that law is very peculiar, and essentially it uses a term that doesn't specifically say single family homes are exempt, but it says, separately alienable from the title. So what that means is if you have a primary home and an ADU on the same lot, that primary home is no longer separately alienable, and so it loses this exemption. So the primary home, if you were to rent it out, would now fall under either your local rent control or state rent control, depending on when that property was built. So this is a consideration for people that are adding an ADU to their property. Now, there are some ways where, there are some ways that you could still maintain this. Like if you lived in the primary dwelling, rent control doesn't matter because it's your house. You're not renting it out. So this really applies more to people where it's a pure rental property and they'd be looking to rent out both the home and the ADU. However, when you build a new ADU, all rent and eviction control laws are based on when the certificate of occupancy was issued. So depending on your local jurisdiction, your local ordinance, if you are under a local rent or eviction control ordinance, it will say for properties built, on or before this date, this law applies. If you're built after that date, this law does not apply. Now, last year or in 2019, there was a Tenant Protection Act passed statewide that introduced some statewide rent controls. And eviction controls. And so newly constructed units with a new certificate of occupancy are now exempt for 15 years from those state requirements. So that's kind of what would apply in most cases to a new ADU. And that will, the situations where that would not apply is if you're converting space that used to be habitable space, especially in a multifamily structure, you probably won't be exempt from rent controls. But a newly constructed ADU, especially like a detached, ground up new unit, that's going to fall under this 15-year exemption. So again, this is another piece we provide in our feasibility study, which is helping you understand how will I be impacted when it comes to rent and eviction controls if I were to build an ADU on my property. And finally, financing options. So this is something that a lot of people ask about. How am I going to finance an ADU? Well, we're seeing some of the common ways people are doing it: cash out refinance, a home equity line of credit, a second mortgage. Maybe you can qualify for a construction or renovation loan, or you have existing savings to lean upon. There are potentially some efforts in place at the state level to create some programs for homeowners to qualify for government-backed loans for ADUs that would make that easier, but we have not seen those progress to a far enough stage yet that we're holding out too much hope. But I do think that a lot of the lawmakers that pushed through the ADU bills in 2020 are looking at how can we make it easier for people to add ADUs. And financing does remain one of the primary challenges, so that's something to look out for. One of the particular financing challenges is that if you are getting a loan on a 1 to 4 unit building, under the guidelines used by most lenders, you can't count the rental income from an ADU in your loan qualification, but you can do that on larger buildings. So if you have a 5-unit building, they're going to say, well, you can make rent from 5 units on this. That's going to help go towards your qualification for the loan, but it does not with an accessory dwelling unit on a 1 to 4 unit building. That's something we would definitely like to see changed in future iterations of ADU legislation. So as we wrap up here, I wanted to share some numbers. Average costs and returns. This is just a sample of recent projects that we've done, studio or 1-bedroom conversion ADUs, to give you a ballpark of what we're talking about. We're seeing total project cost on average just a little under $200,000. On a per square foot basis, that breaks out to about $390 a square foot, which is a way that a lot of people think about it. However, when you look at market rents, especially right now in this region, we're seeing that people we're estimating an average net operating income for a new ADU of $22,429 per year. That's really great. And if you were to finance that at current interest rates, you might be looking at something $9,000 to $10,000 a year in debt service, leaving you with a cash flow of around $12,500. So again, these are just averages against some recent projects, but essentially some of these projects are very difficult. Some of these projects are easier. These are just averages, but we're seeing about 9.1 years to pay back, 12% return on investment. So this represents a really good investment opportunity. ADUs, we really are big believers in ADUs, not just for their ability to add to the housing stock, which is very important. And you can definitely be a part of that solution by adding an ADU or multiple ADUs on your property. But obviously from a property owner standpoint, from a rental standpoint, this is a great opportunity. if you think about how much it would cost to buy a condo and rent that out, and the rent you could get for that versus versus build an ADU and rent that out, and the rents might not be exactly the same, but you're spending much less on constructing an ADU. And I think that's really the important thing about the opportunity here with this. So what is it like to work with us? Well, basically, three big phases. The first phase is a lot of Phil's time, feasibility study. This is where we do our zoning research, our records research. We do a site inspection, a written report, and the financial analysis that's part of that. And again, the goal of this is to help you make that go or no go decision into the next phase once you understand whether or not you have a feasible project. Then we move into the design and permitting phase. This is where you work primarily with Gracie, who's on today, to get you a custom design, detailed drawings, a completed application with your local jurisdiction, to manage through the plan check process, and to ultimately get you an approved set of plans. And then with that approved set of plans, you can take those to a contractor who can pull permits and begin construction. And we stay very involved throughout that phase. We can provide ongoing site visits, meeting with your contractor, helping out from a design perspective. Gracie's very good with beautiful interiors and helping you select finishes, fixtures, fittings. And we can even provide site inspections from Phil, who can kind of come out ahead of time before the local inspector comes out and helps make sure that everything was done properly. So this is our current suite of services and how we're assisting our clients. And we'd love to work with you. One question that we get a lot, and I want Gracie to chime in on this, is why do I need an architect? And there's a lot of reasons why it's beneficial for you to work with an architect as opposed to someone who's not actually a licensed architect. And Gracie, I wanted to put up the slide and just let you talk to a few of these points.
Yeah. One of the things, well, one, I want to say it's important to hire an architect, but not just an architect, like someone who's done ADUs before, because it is such a specific part of code and the law. So it's helpful to have someone who's done it before. It's good to have an architect because we do really accurate and detailed drawings. And we also get as-builts done of your building. So we know kind of what's there, especially since we do a lot of like conversion ADUs. It's important to know what we have to work with, so we have accurate dimensions to work off of. So when you actually build it, you're not like, oh, we're missing 2 feet here when you really need that. And then we really act as your advocate for the city. So you don't have to necessarily like go in and say, have you gotten my plans? We do all that coordination for you. And right now cities are like really overwhelmed because a lot of people are applying for construction. So we've been hearing that they're getting twice as many applications as they normally have. So they're busy. And because they're busy, we're not always hearing back from them right away. So that's what I'm here for, is because you guys have jobs, you're busy. And so I'm here to kind of like be your advocate, push things through, push things forward, make sure everything's to code. And having a good set of drawings to give to your contractor is going to help save you money in the long run, because you're going to avoid potential problems in construction in the field. So that's why working with an architect is helpful.
Absolutely. And again, we see a lot of people that start off with this idea of doing an ADU. Maybe they feel a little bit confident because they have some experience in remodeling properties, or doing some sort of some development projects, and they try to go at this by themselves. And sure enough, multiple times now, I have been called back by someone I talked to a year ago, and they say, Chris, we need your help. And they've now delayed their project that long, trying to do it on their own. Whereas if they had started with us to begin with, had the feasibility study, had the expertise of Phil and Gracie, they would probably have saved a lot of time and money. So I think it's really important that, if you're considering doing one of these projects, to really look at doing it right, starting on the right path the first time, and obviously that's gonna have its benefits for you. So let's wrap up talking about a summary of some of the risks and opportunities. So as we talked about, the ADUs can be difficult to finance. If you are going to plan on living on the property in one of the other units, you will be sharing a lot with a tenant, which is not always everybody's cup of tea. In any case, you'll be becoming a landlord if you're not already a landlord, and that's not a role that everybody wants to get involved in. However, we really do believe in a community of rental housing providers like this rental housing association and like many others throughout the Bay Area. And we are grateful that there are so many property owners that are renting out units and are providing a solution to the housing shortage. And we want to help property owners be successful. That's one of our primary goals with Edrington and Associates and with Adapt Dwellings. We want to help you create an ADU. We want to help you make more money. We want to help you be a good landlord. So we're here to support you. Rent and eviction controls, I guess that's another risk depending on, again, how you plan to use your property. In terms of opportunities, there's substantial ROI, return on investment potential. You will be earning additional rental income. Who doesn't like that? Increasing your property value, increasing the housing supply. And again, depending on how you want to use an ADU, it's a great solution for moving in family members, whether that be children, parents, grandparents, friends, anyone that you could offer some housing to, and you have the benefit of knowing the person. So it's not like a stranger living on your property. It's another great opportunity. In terms of Edrington and Associates, we do provide other real estate services, and we just wanted to quickly inform you of what those are. We're real estate brokers. We can help you buy and sell properties and 1031 exchanges. On the consulting side of our business, we do a lot of inspections of properties, particularly pertaining to habitability concerns, making sure that you are renting out a safe dwelling unit and that you're not going to face any challenges with your tenants. We help people resolve notices of violation, and we work with illegal units. We help with condo conversions. And we also provide litigation support services as expert witnesses to attorneys whose clients are facing lawsuits. And we can provide expertise on and our opinions on the standard of care for a landlord. So we do a lot of work in this area, which is also where we see a lot of the horror stories that we're trying to prevent you all from facing potentially if you renting out an illegal unit. So before we move on to questions, I just want to put up this slide and I'll leave it up here for a moment because we always get this question: how do I get a copy of the slides? Just text "get slides," that's all one word, to the number on the screen, 22828. You can just open your phone, send a new message, a text message to the number 22828, and just have the message say "get slides." That will prompt you for an email address, and when we get that email address from you, we will then be able to send you a copy of today's slides. So be sure to do that if you want to get on our mailing list and get a copy of the slides. And Robert, I know we have some questions that have come in. Do you want to kick those off for us?
Well, thank you, Chris. And first, virtual round of applause. So I just did that right now. So thank you guys, Grace, Phil, Chris, awesome presentation.
So great.
Really learned a lot. I have a question myself, but let's ask those that are in the chat box right now. And again, all attendees, if you have a question, please feel free to put it in the chat box and we will get to it. Jim, thank you for your question. Jim is asking, what's the estimated cost for a feasibility study? Now, I probably can guess that this just depends on where it is and that sort of thing. But Chris, Grace, Phil, whoever wants to answer this, what is that estimated cost for a feasibility study?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that question. We do our feasibility studies as a fixed priced offering to make it super easy for people to say yes or no to. So it does vary a little bit based on the size of your property, how many units, and what type of ADU you're looking to build. But those feasibility studies are typically around $2,500.
Great, awesome. And then I have another question from Kyle. Thank you, Kyle, for your question. I have a 4-unit building in Oakland with a 5th unpermitted unit within the building envelope of the ground floor, above grade. Can I legalize this 5th unit as well as converted detached garage into a 6th unit? So maybe I should go rent from Kyle, or does that technically exceed the 1 conversion per 4-unit limit? So kind of a big question there, but.
Yeah, that's a big question. Yeah, so technically you can only create one conversion ADU for every 4 existing units. So no, I don't think that in that scenario that you'd be able to create 2 ADUs converted from existing space. Um, but there are some reasons why I might still recommend having us take a look and really understanding what are your best options. Which space would be the best to create an ADU. Phil, do you have any additional thoughts on that?
No, yeah, just that sounds, having one unit is for sure going to be feasible. And definitely we can talk to you about that and how the steps that you need to go through. But yes, an additional unit, it's going to depend.
Okay. So maybe Kyle hook up with Chris, Phil, and Grace sometime after the presentation.
And Robert, I might just add to that, one way you might be able to handle that situation is do your conversion ADU from the one that's within the existing building envelope, knock down that garage. Now you have space to do a new detached ADU, which that is allowed under the state law. So again, there's some options depending on what you're interested in doing.
Awesome. Cool. Anita has a question. How are we required to inform the existing tenant of our intent of adding an ADU?
Well, I mean, it's depends a little bit upon your what type of building that you have, but you are allowed to do this under state law. I mean, you will want to notify tenants, obviously, if you're going to be doing any kind of construction work that's going to cause disturbances, noise disturbances, things like that. And you should talk to a landlord tenant attorney who can help you with notice requirements for those types of issues. But this is something you're allowed to do. People have tenants on their property and you're still allowed to build an ADU. You just need to comply with your local requirements for noise and the times of day that you can do the buildings and things like that.
Great. Kyle has another question. What is the current turnaround time for ADU permit applications in the city of Oakland?
Phil, you want to take a crack at that?
I had to laugh too.
Yeah. I'm sorry. There is no guaranteed permit turnaround time. Oakland is currently a great big black hole. They're getting better, but they're a great big black hole where paper goes to die. So it's tough it's really, really tough to say right now. It's very tough. We're hoping that things are going to open up. We're hoping that the city's going to start opening up and getting people back into their offices. But, this COVID thing, it's, impossible for us to predict.
COVID plus, so everyone working remotely plus understaffing, I think Gracie, there's only one employee in Oakland who's reviewing ADU applications. Is that correct?
Yeah, they have one designated person. And, with every time you apply, it usually takes them about a month to review it. And then they issue comments and then we have to respond to those comments and then they review again. So it's definitely like minimum 2 to 3 months just to get through the city. And that's like if they're acting quickly. So yeah, that's what I'd say.
Wow.
Well, it's a very good time, however, to get this permit stuff going. Right now, the other problem that we've got from a building standpoint is materials are extremely expensive because we have supply chain problems. Contractors are very, very busy. And so getting the paperwork done now, which is a bit of an arduous process, will prepare you to be ready for a construction next spring. And which when we're hoping that, things are going to be opened up, prices are going to be back down and contractor availability is going to be much higher. And so you'll hopefully have a smooth project moving forward. But getting these, all this preparatory work done now is really going to be key to getting that project done in some sort of a timely fashion.
Yeah.
I do want to recognize former San Jose, former City of San Leandro City Council member Ed Hernandez is on the call with us, and he actually has a question. So good to see you, Ed. Ed wants to know if you can count the rental income of an ADU after 2 years. I understand that may be possible with FHA guidelines. So any thoughts on that?
That's not something that we've heard of to date. If I'd be very interested to know, where that information was found, because I'd love to be able to tell people about it. But we've been seeing even now with an ADU after 2 years that they're not considering that. Now, I am aware there's a couple pieces of legislation in the works at the state level that might allow for such things, but not anything that I've seen passed yet.
Great. All right. I don't see any other questions in chat. Is there one last minute question? Oh, I had one. So you mentioned earlier in your presentation, Chris, that there are ADU friendly communities. Not that I'm anywhere near retirement, but my brother kind of turned me on that we are seeing a lot of pop-up ADU communities happening specifically down in the Palm Springs area. He's like, Robert, I could go and I could buy an ADU here. And I was like, oh my gosh, let me tell you all about ADUs. And so I gave a little bit of education. But where are some of those friendly communities that you're seeing here in either the Bay Area or statewide?
Well, I'd say, first of all, that there's probably I'm not sure exactly the type of community he was talking about, but there's a distinction between an ADU and something like a tiny home or a mobile home, right? And I think that kind of the idea of like a pop-up community kind of lends itself more to something like a tiny house or a mobile home. And an ADU, it cannot be separately bought or sold. So it needs to be part of an existing dwelling, right? Accessory to an existing dwelling. You buy the lot and you get both the primary house and the ADU. But that said, I'd say San Jose is probably one of the friendlier regions for ADUs currently in the Bay Area. They've done a lot to go above and beyond what the state is requiring, including allowing you to build ADUs, I think up to 24 feet in height. They have an amnesty program. So that's definitely a positive development. I've heard some things varying things about San Mateo, but I think that they're moving in the direction a little bit closer to San Jose. And so, there are definitely some jurisdictions that are really trying to make it easier. San Diego and Southern California also, I think, is a jurisdiction that's doing more for property owners based on what we've heard. But yeah, unfortunately, the big ones up here, especially in the East Bay, are a little bit behind the curve, I'd say, in terms of pro ADU legislation.
So Chris, I actually had a question, and you mentioned it as far as a tiny home, because my question was going to be, would a tiny home put on my property, let's say the back lot, would be considered an ADU? But now I think you answered it, and it would not, because it's movable and it can go to another place. Is that correct?
Yeah, Phil, I see you wanting to jump on this one.
Yeah. So there's a difference between a tiny home and an efficiency unit. Okay. So for an ADU, you have to meet the minimums of an efficiency unit. So you need at least 220 square feet.
Okay.
And then also, now a tiny home, could be built to that. Mm-hmm. And the fact that the tiny home is movable, if it's put on a permanent foundation, then it's no longer movable. And, then it would be, again, if it's met all the other requirements, it could certainly be considered an ADU.
Okay, cool. Thank you, Phil.
All right, well, with that, we're gonna go ahead and end our webinar today. Again, I wanna give a shout out and a big thanks to Chris, Phil, and Grace. This was really educational, and I'm probably gonna bug you afterwards, Chris, and say, maybe you should write something for our newsletter. So
I'm working on it.
But really learned a lot, and I want to thank all our attendees online, and please continue to look at our new and improved website for Rental Housing Association. We've got some great programs coming up, as well as considering a hybrid event in July. So fingers crossed that we continue to trend in the right direction with COVID. But please stay safe, everybody out there. Please wear your masks, and please follow your local health official ordinances right now until we get past this. But again, thank you all.
Great presentation, you guys. Great
presentation. So
thank you, everybody.
Have an awesome afternoon.
Yeah, we appreciate the opportunity, and please reach out. The phone number here, email address are great ways to reach us if you'd like to learn more about how we can help you.
Great. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Phil and Grace. Thank you.
Thanks.
Everyone.
Okay, bye.
Have a great day.